So this will be the last video, the last mini lecture for power and politics in the ancient world. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Byzantine Empire. Think about the Byzantine Empire as the kind of ancestor to Rome. So, Constantine legalizes Christianity. He moves the capital from Rome over here to a city he calls Constantinople. This is a guy with a healthy ego. And the empire kind of morphs into what is called the Byzantine Empire. That is a Christian empire with a Christian emperor. And we're going to go to a church of San Vitale, the Church of Saint Vitus, in Ravenna, Italy, that was built in the 6th century CE by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. Now, Justinian was the secular political leader, but here again, church and state, religion and state are very much intertwined. He is a secular emperor who rules as a sacred monarch, and he wanted to create a church in St. Vitus because his armies had won a number of key battles against some pagan cultures in Europe, and so he wanted to kind of create this church as almost a monument to his victories. And it might not look like anything that spectacular on the exterior, but it's when we turn to the interior and we realize every single surface of the Church of San Vitale is covered in glowing golden mosaic. And I'm just showing you here a few different images of the interior to get a sense of what that kind of glowing light is. Just like Chartres Cathedral in the late Middle Ages in the Gothic period, entering into the Church of San Vitale must have just felt transformative, that you are transported to an otherworldly, to an ephemeral place. And these mosaics really speak to the political power of the Byzantine emperor, of Justinian. You'll notice here the high altar. This is where the most important religious rituals in Christianity are performed. And right above that high altar, we see an image of Jesus, of Christ. He's sitting flanked by angels and saints. Oops. Here we see that below. Very different than Christ as the Good Shepherd. I mean, Christ here, he almost looks like an emperor himself. And on the side walls, over here and over here, we see these large wall mosaics depicting Justinian, the emperor, on one side, and then his empress Theodora on the other side of Christ. And look at Justinian. He is clad in purple and gold. We talk about the color royal blue. This actually comes from ancient Rome. That purple was a color that was reserved just for emperors. And so we see Justinian wearing purple. He has this elaborate crown, even a halo. That's another pagan Roman convention that the Byzantines also adapted. And he stands with gifts to give to Christ, flanked by church officials. We see priests over here. And then who is next to him as well, but political advisors and the military. So Justinian is seen as a kind of leader in all of these realms. His power knows no bounds. Let's take a look at Theodora. Similarly clad in jewels and ivory and gold and purple, surrounded by her advisors and attendants. Theodora is also presenting a gift to Christ, and I love this little detail. Look at the hem of this ornate robe. In gold, we see 1, 2, 3 figures. These are the 3 kings. The story of these 3 rulers who heard about the birth of Jesus, and they go to visit him as an infant, and they bring him gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so as a kind of model of gift giving, we see the three kings, sometimes called the three magi, actually included here on Theodora's robe. And you want to know the zinger of these elaborate mosaics and this opulent church? Theodora and Justinian never even saw them. Both of them never even went to Ravenna. So what is the point of spending all this money? Well, I think what we can see here is how these mosaics act as a kind of representation of the royal presence in the church, that they are political leaders who have an important role to play in church leadership. They are always in church. They're never gone. They are eternal participants in Christian ritual. The last work we're going to look at for this week, we're turning to West Africa and the Kingdom of Benin, which is an area in present-day Nigeria. Nigeria is here kind of at the bottom of the kind of western protrusion here from Africa. Benin is also a nation state today, but when we talk about the Kingdom of Benin, we are looking at Nigeria. And Benin was a very powerful kingdom up until the very late 1800s, the 19th century. What happens is as European merchant ships begin to visit West Africa from kind of the 15th century on, Benin controlled the trade between inland cultural groups and the Europeans who came to the coast. The Kingdom of Benin, they were well known to European traders and merchants, and they became very wealthy as the go-betweens. Benin society was highly structured with a king, also called an Oba, who was believed to be a direct descendant of the Oranmiyan, who is the legendary founder of the dynasty. The Oba was not just a political leader, but the spiritual leader. He was considered, and is still today, a deity and held in the highest veneration. And he was an economic leader as well. He controlled all the major exports and controlled the trade between the kingdom and Europeans. Art was an important instrument of ideology for the Oba, and the Oba controlled a huge kind of artistic studio at his palace. Now, what happens, and this is an important part of the story of these amazing bronze plaques that come from the royal art studios in Benin, is an event that happens at the end of the 19th century, the Benin Punitive Expedition of 1897. So what happens is that the British tried to expand their own control over trade in Africa, and some Benin merchants thought the British had overstepped, and they killed a few British envoys. So what do the British do? In 1897, they send an armed expedition. They captured the king of Benin. They captured the Oba. They destroyed his palace, and they took away most sculpture and regalia, including works in wood and ivory, and also a huge collection of these brass plaques. And this photograph here is from the punitive expedition. We see some British troops standing amongst all of the priceless objects that they stole. Now, these objects then ended up in museums throughout Europe, places like the British Museum, and in North America as well, places like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, really famous museums. And there's been growing discussions about, these works were stolen. They were taken as an act of colonialism and imperialism. what should we do with these works? Where should they be displayed? And so the Benin Dialogue Group, and we see part of the Benin Dialogue Group happening below, in the photograph below, forms with representatives from Nigeria, different museums. They hold a big conference to establish some sort of process for returning these objects and discussing this painful colonial history that is connected to them. Let's actually, though, take a look at the objects themselves to see what is so special about them. You know, often what happens is we think in the West, in Europe and North America, that that our society was first for all technological advancements, but that is simply not true. And these plaques show us very sophisticated metal smithing and metal casting techniques, which were established in Africa long before they were established in other areas. What we're looking at here is the oba, shown in hierarchical scale here. Here is a detail, and here's the oba again. And I actually love this plaque here with the Europeans, because look at the tiny Europeans in the back. They're just these little kind of peripheral figures. Their relief is very low. They don't really protrude much from the bronze plaque itself. And the oba is shown as a powerful, really kind of fearsome leader here. And again, these plaques came from the palace. They came from the Royal Art Studios, and they would be displayed in the palace themselves. So imagine, as a visitor to the oba's palace, looking at all of these images of the oba with his attendants, the oba who just completely towers over the European figures in the right. All right, this is the end of weeks of the power and politics videos in the ancient world. And I'll be back with the modern world for next week.